There is a plant creeping through the cracks of sidewalks, curling around garden beds, flattening itself against hot stone and dry soil. And most people never give it a second look. They see red stems, small, fleshy leaves, a stubborn green thing that refuses to die. Then they reach for poison. But what if that plant is not a nuisance at all? What if it is one of the most nutritious edible plants on Earth? What if the thing we were trained to spray, rip out, and curse under our breath is carrying a nutritional profile so unusual, so resilient, and so biologically strange that modern science struggled to explain how it was even possible? Stay with this story, because it does not end in a garden. It reaches back through ancient sanctuaries, buried seed jars, Roman fields, medieval kitchens, indigenous agriculture, heart disease research, drought science, and the modern chemical war on anything that grows too freely to be owned. And if Forgotten Earthworks is uncovering something here that matters to you, subscribe, like, and share this with someone who still believes food only comes from a store. Because some of the most important knowledge on Earth has not been lost. It has been downgraded, dismissed, and taught out of us. The plant is purslane. You have probably seen it. You may have stepped on it this week. Thick red stems, smooth, paddle-shaped succulent leaves, tiny yellow flowers. It sprawls low to the ground, slips between stones, survives in heat that punishes everything around it, and returns again and again, no matter how many times people try to erase it. It looks humble, common, easy to ignore. That is part of the story. Because purslane has been feeding human beings for thousands of years. In northern Greece, seeds were stored in clay vessels around 1050 BC. When those containers were opened thousands of years later, among the preserved remains were tiny black seeds from the same plant that still grows wild in disturbed ground today. By the 7th century BC, it appears in sacred spaces in the Greek world. By the 4th century BC, it was important enough for Theophrastus, often called the father of botany, to write cultivation instructions for it and place it beside other useful crops. That matters. It means this was not treated as a random roadside growth. It was known, named, managed, eaten. The Romans carried it across continents. Medieval Europeans used it regularly enough that it appears in records not as a rarity, but as part of ordinary life. In 1288, when the foods consumed in Milan were being documented, purslane was there, not as a curiosity, not as some desperate famine food, as a staple. That word changes everything. Staple. Because a staple is not what people nibble during a novelty phase. A staple is what people return to, what households trust, what cultures keep alive because it proves itself again and again. And for centuries, purslane did exactly that. Then the story widens. After the Columbian Exchange, Europeans recorded purslane in North America as if it had arrived with them. But archaeology tells a deeper story. Seeds found in Ontario date to around 1350 AD. Seeds found in Kentucky stretch back far earlier. Long before colonists began naming what they thought they had introduced, indigenous peoples were already cultivating and using this plant as part of a sophisticated food system in eastern North America, alongside sunflowers, squash, and chenopods. Think about what that means. Two worlds, separated by an ocean, shaped by different climates, languages, beliefs, and agricultural traditions, both recognized the same low-growing succulent as useful enough to cultivate and keep. That is not an accident. That is pattern recognition over generations. That is human intelligence meeting ecological reality and making the same decision twice. So what did they know? They knew what abundance looks like when it does not arrive in neat rows with labels attached. They knew what durability looks like when a plant can survive heat, poor soil, neglect, and disturbance. And they knew, even without laboratory instruments, that some foods do more for the body than others. Centuries later, science began catching up. In the 20th century, researchers became obsessed with a question that still haunts modern health. Why do some populations suffer catastrophic rates of heart disease, while others seem strangely protected? One of the most influential efforts to answer that question followed men across multiple countries for decades, comparing diet, lifestyle, and mortality. One population kept confounding expectations. On Crete, people consumed relatively high-fat diets, the kind of diets that many nutritional theories of the time would have treated with suspicion. By those assumptions, they should have been dropping from heart disease at alarming rates. They were not. In fact, they showed some of the lowest cardiovascular mortality ever recorded in that research. At first, the explanation was framed around olive oil, and olive oil certainly mattered. But later, when scientists looked deeper into preserved samples and into the actual foods that shaped that island's diet, another piece of the puzzle emerged. The people of Crete were not simply eating fat. They were eating a food web enriched by omega-3 fatty acids, and threaded through that food web, appearing in salads, stews, sautés, and animal feed, was purslane. Every day, not as a supplement, not as a health trend, not as a miracle marketed in capsules, as food. That distinction matters more than most people realize. Modern culture often treats nutrition like a product category. Ancient and traditional food systems treated it like a relationship. The plants fed the animals fed the people. The same resilient species that grew wild in the margins entered the whole diet, directly and indirectly, until its nutritional effect was woven through an entire landscape. Then came the measurements. When researchers analyzed purslane's composition in detail, the results startled them. Fresh leaves contained remarkable levels of alpha-linolenic acid, a plant-based omega-3 fatty acid. Not a trace amount. Not an interesting little bonus. A concentration high enough to place purslane among the richest vegetable sources of omega-3 ever recorded. Higher than spinach. Higher than lettuce by a wide margin. A roadside plant was outperforming the polished greens of modern produce aisles. And it did not stop there. Purslane showed unusually high levels of vitamin E, significant beta-carotene, melatonin, glutathione, potassium, magnesium, calcium, a nutritional density so broad and concentrated that the plant began to look less like an overlooked edible and more like a biological provocation, as if nature had packed far too much value into something people were calling a weed. Then the story turned stranger. Because land plants are not supposed to do certain things. There are compounds we associate with marine systems, with fish, with algae, with oceans and food chains far removed from a dry patch of soil beside a driveway. Yet purslane showed traces of EPA, the long-chain omega-3 fatty acid more commonly linked with aquatic sources. The amount was small, but its presence was enough to raise suspicion. Some assumed contamination. The idea that a terrestrial garden plant could produce it seemed too odd to accept easily. But the findings held. And once again, the plant refused to behave the way the categories said it should. This is where many stories would already be finished. Ancient food, modern nutrient analysis, impressive health relevance. That alone would be enough to rescue purslane from obscurity. But purslane was not done humiliating our assumptions, because in 2022, scientists studying how plants survive stress uncovered something so unusual in purslane that it rewrote expectations about photosynthesis itself. To understand why that matters, consider the basic problem every plant must solve. It needs sunlight, carbon dioxide, and water. But in hot, dry conditions, those demands begin to collide. Open the pores during the day to pull in carbon dioxide, and the plant loses precious water. Close them to conserve moisture, and growth slows or stalls. Different plant groups evolved different strategies to survive this trade-off. Many ordinary plants use what is called C3 photosynthesis. It works well when water is available and heat is manageable. Crops like corn and sugarcane use C4 photosynthesis, a system that performs better under intense light and higher temperatures. Desert-adapted plants such as cacti use CAM photosynthesis, opening pores at night when conditions are cooler, storing carbon dioxide, and conserving water during the day. Each strategy carries advantages. Each also carries costs. C4 is efficient and productive, but still water-hungry compared with true desert survivors. CAM is brilliant for drought, but slow. Plants built for survival under extreme scarcity often pay with reduced growth. Purslane seemed to ignore that bargain. It grew fast. It tolerated punishing drought. It did not merely endure difficult conditions, it expanded through them. For years, scientists suspected it might combine these pathways in some compartmentalized way, using one system in one tissue, another somewhere else. That alone would have been interesting. But the deeper cellular mapping revealed something more extraordinary. In Purslane, the machinery for C4 and CAM was operating in the same cells, coordinated across time, with the products of one feeding into the other. Fast growth chemistry by day. Drought survival chemistry by night. Not switching between separate plant identities. Not outsourcing one function to another compartment. Integrating them. A hybrid survival strategy in the same living space. That is why researchers described it as rare and exceptional, because it means Purslane is not just hardy, it is metabolically inventive. It occupies a biological edge case, a living example of how evolution can solve pressure with elegance instead of compromise. It grows with the urgency of a productive crop and endures with the caution of a desert plant. Now place that against the century we are entering. More heat, more erratic rain, more salinity creeping into soils, more crop failures clustering in semi-arid regions, more pressure on food systems built around fragile uniformity. Again and again, climate projections point toward the same vulnerable zones, places where rainfall is already marginal, where conventional staples struggle first, and where farmers are being pushed into a narrowing corridor between drought and collapse. And here, already present, already adapted, already edible, already nutrient-dense, is a plant that thrives in harsh heat, survives on a fraction of the water demanded by major crops, tolerates difficult soils, and reproduces with astonishing determination. It can complete its life cycle where others fail. It can root from stem fragments. It can produce enormous numbers of seeds. Those seeds can remain viable in the soil for years, waiting out human attempts at control with almost taunting patience. Heat does not finish it. Drought does not finish it. Disturbance often helps it. This is not a weak plant asking for rescue. This is a strong plant waiting for recognition. And yet, the modern response to Purslane has not been curiosity. It has been war. Look at how industrial landscaping, lawn culture, and chemical agriculture classify it. Weed, pest, intruder, target. There are products designed specifically to kill it. Extension guides instruct homeowners and growers on eradication. The cultural reflex is immediate. If it appears where humans did not plan for it, destroy it. But why? Why does a plant with this much nutritional value, this much ecological toughness, this much historical legitimacy, and this much future relevance get treated like an enemy? Part of the answer is aesthetic. Modern landscapes have been trained to fear spontaneity. A clean lawn is praised. A self-seeding edible is condemned. Order, in this system, matters more than utility. We have learned to prize control so deeply that a useful plant becomes offensive the moment it grows without permission. Part of the answer is economic. Systems built on scarcity and dependence do not know what to do with abundance that reproduces itself. You can package fish oil. You can brand fortified foods. You can engineer seed dependency. You can build recurring markets around fragile inputs and specialized supply chains. But you cannot easily build the same model around a resilient edible that appears for free in disturbed ground and asks almost nothing from the grower. Purslane breaks the script. It is hard to monopolize, hard to contain, hard to make people permanently dependent on. It does not present itself as premium. It does not need glossy marketing to survive. It simply grows. And because it grows outside the story modern consumers are taught to trust, it is easier to label it a problem than to admit what it might represent. A question: what else have we been trained to destroy before understanding? Around the world, not everyone forgot. In India, purslane is still eaten. In Greece, it still appears on the table. In Mexico, in Turkey, in Iran, in China, and across the Middle East, versions of this plant remain part of living food traditions. It is sautéed, stewed, folded into salads, paired with garlic, yogurt, chiles, herbs, oils, grains. Entire cultures kept the relationship intact. That may be the most important clue of all. Because when a plant remains in continuous use across centuries and across climates, it is telling you something. It is telling you it is useful enough to survive fashion, practical enough to survive conquest, valuable enough to survive the collapse of one empire after another. While entire systems of certainty rose and fell, purslane kept growing low to the ground, close to human settlement, waiting for anyone wise enough to recognize it. And perhaps that is why this story lands so hard now. We are living in an age of severe forgetting. People can identify brand logos more easily than edible plants. Children grow up surrounded by calories and starved of ecological literacy. Entire populations have been separated from the sight of food in its living form. The result is not just ignorance, it is dependency. A person who cannot recognize nourishment outside a package is easier to control than a person who can walk into a garden, a field edge, or a neglected corner of a yard and see dinner. Purslane threatens that dependency in a very quiet way. It reminds us that some of the most valuable forms of nourishment do not arrive with permission slips. They arrive uninvited. They arrive unbranded. They arrive in places we were taught to dismiss. And once you see that clearly, something shifts. The world stops looking empty. It starts looking full. So learn the plant. Learn its red stems and its smooth, fleshy leaves. Learn the way it hugs the ground. Learn the tiny yellow flowers tucked close to the nodes. Learn the juicy snap when a stem breaks. Learn to harvest it young when the texture is tender and the flavor is bright, lemony, slightly salty, almost as if the plant carries a memory of sea minerals into dry land. Eat it raw. Toss it into salads. Sauté it like spinach. Add it to soups and stews. Fold it into eggs. Blend it into savory mixtures. Pickle it. Share it. Let some of it mature and go to seed. Save those seeds. Scatter them where heat punishes other crops. Watch what returns. And then do something even more important. Teach one other person. Teach someone that the line between weed and food is often nothing more than cultural amnesia. Teach someone that resilience does not always look dramatic. Sometimes it looks like a small plant spreading through a crack in concrete. Teach someone that the future of food may not depend only on inventing new systems, but on remembering what older systems already knew. Because this is larger than purslane. This is about the kind of civilization we are becoming. One that destroys what it does not recognize, or one that learns to see again. One that doubles down on chemical control, or one that starts asking why the most adaptable and nourishing species are so often treated as disposable. One that waits for salvation from laboratories and corporations, or one that notices that life has already been solving impossible problems all around us. Purslane is not a miracle because it is magical. It is a miracle because it is real. It is real in archaeology, real in ancient agriculture, real in traditional cuisines, real in blood chemistry, real in nutrient analysis, real in the harsh logic of drought, real in the cellular choreography that lets it grow fast and survive hard conditions at the same time, real in the driveway, real in the cracks, real under your feet. And maybe that is the final revelation. The future does not always arrive looking futuristic. Sometimes it arrives looking ignored. So the next time you see purslane creeping through hot stone or tangled at the edge of a garden bed, stop for a moment before you call it a weed. Ask what older people knew that we forgot. Ask what kind of world teaches children to poison one of the most resilient edible plants on Earth before they ever learn its name. Ask what else is growing around us right now, dismissed because it is common, powerful because it is free, and dangerous only to systems that profit from dependence. If this opened something for you, subscribe to Forgotten Earthworks, like this video, and share it with someone who needs to see the ground differently. Because memory is a kind of survival too, and sometimes the knowledge that could help carry us through the future has been beside us all along, spreading quietly through the cracks, waiting to be remembered.